Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, history and folklore about the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. Edith Wharton. You know that saying, keeping up with the Joneses? Well, the Joneses were real. Descendants of English and Dutch colonists, they were at the upper crust of New York's rich and had accrued their fortunes through banking, shipping, and real estate. George Frederick Jones of this family married Lucretia Stevens Rhinelander, who had ancestors steeped in colonial and revolutionary history. Both belonged to the most exclusive segment of New York's high society, intermingling and intermarrying with only their own kind. Among their children, this couple had a little girl, born on January 24th, 1862, who they nicknamed Pussy, but whose real name was Edith Newbold Jones. She was born at their brownstone at 14 West 33rd Street in New York City. Long before her were born brothers Frederick Rhinelander Jones, age 16, and Henry Edward Jones, age 11. Her father traveled like a migrating bird, back and forth between the old and new worlds, following the tides of the economies to continuously sustain or build his fortune. Little Edith would inherit this love of travel. After drifting around Europe for most of her young childhood, she and her family returned to New York when she was 10, in 1872, after she'd suffered for a while with typhoid, which she contracted during some time spent in the Black Forest. But even when back in the States, her family was on the move, and like many of the wealthy of that time would spend winters in New York City and the summers in the town of Newport, Rhode Island, or some like-minded fashionable place to escape the city heat. She never, however, went to school. It was thought that ladies of a certain class didn't need to be educated. The belief was that they'd benefit more from knowing the intricacies of etiquette. But Edith craved knowledge. She devoured the books in her father's library, and thanks to her years spent in distant lands, she could speak German, French, and Italian. But her mother told her that she was not to read novels until she was married. Even when she was younger, she'd hold a book and walk around the room, pretending to read aloud from it. Little Edith tried her hand at poetry, and then, at age 11, she wrote her first book. One of the first lines read, "Oh, how do you do, Mrs. Brown?" said Mrs. Tompkins. "If only I'd known you were going to call, I should have tidied up the drawing-room." Full of excitement, Edith showed her finished work to her mother, who, after a while of consideration, returned it with the dry statement, "Drawing-rooms are always tidy." Edith and her mother seemed to always suffer a strained relationship. In an era when one of a mother's chief duties was to find a fortunate and suitable match for her daughters, to have a daughter begin to show an inkling of being different would have been quite a worry. Edith was hurt by this, and afterwards stayed away from writing stories, but she couldn't keep herself from writing altogether. Poems would have to do for now. When she was 15, she received her first payment for writing after translating a poem from German, but it had to be published under the name of one of her father's male friends, without her name attached. It was seen at the time as disgraceful for a lady's name to show up in print for anything other than birth, marriage, and death. But that same year, without her mother's knowledge, she wrote a story called Fast and Loose, and the next year her father arranged for the publication of 24 of her poems and 5 translations of works of others. Despite this success, her family was not supportive of her desire, and again, she gave up on publication for a while, but still wrote. It would be 9 years before she published again. In 1882, at the age of 20, she became engaged to Henry Stevens. They'd known each other for a while, and he was successful enough, but soon afterward, the engagement was ended. 3 years later, she'd marry a Boston banker 12 years her senior, named Edward Robbins Wharton. The young Mrs. Edith Wharton and her new husband both shared the love of travel, but it's uncertain if they shared much else. They seemed to get along in a friendly manner, but it may have been more of a marriage of convenience and wealth. He was of a good pedigree, but didn't have much money of his own. Didn't stop him from the enjoyment of spending hers. There were rumors, too, that he may have been cheating on her, or even gay. Not that homosexuality bothered Edith. Some of her best friends were gay men, but he was supposed to be faithful to her. Some wondered if their marriage was ever even consummated. One thing was for certain: he suffered from severe depression. His family had always summered in the Berkshires at Lenox, Mass. So the couple built Edith's dream house there. She had to take control of the construction of the house, not only because of her husband's sometimes distant nature brought about by his depression, but also because she'd been interested in architecture and home decorating since she was a child. One of her early book titles is The Decorating of Houses, and is still in print. It was in 1902 that the home she'd named The Mount was created. Edith described herself as the hermit of western Massachusetts. She'd spend endless hours directing workmen and planning. On a slope overlooking dark waters and densely wooded shores of Laurel Lake, we built a spacious and dignified house, she wrote. House is perhaps an understatement. A quick lesson in some of the terms used in the Berkshires. A mansion is new. A Berkshire cottage is old. But do not let the word cottage fool you. These aren't dainty little houses. These cottages can consist of 106 rooms, as in the case of Elm Court. The Mount is in modern terms a mansion, but at the time it was built, it would have been considered tacky to call it that. Edith Wharton carefully organized the gardens and what would be planted there. Really, she wrote, it looks for a fleeting moment like a garden in some civilized climate. In 1904, while she tended to her gardens, she wrote another book called Italian Villas and Their Gardens, which was illustrated by her friend Maxfield Parrish, a famous painter. Edith knew everyone in high places, even presidents. Most of her time at the Mount was spent entertaining her friends, considering the gardens and plans for the house, doting on her many dogs, which would be lovingly buried in a pet cemetery on the grounds complete with small headstones, and, of course, writing. This was made easier by the arranging for her own private bedroom suite complete with writing space. It became painfully obvious that her marriage was to be an unhappy one. She saw no reason that they should have to share a room. From there she was able to complete about a book a year. I'm not going to talk here too much about the plots of most of her books. There are just too many, but I highly encourage you to seek some out. There is one that I'd like to focus on, though. So we're going to take a small detour and look at that for a moment. The book is called Ethan Frome. I won't give too much of it away, but I will say that it takes place in a town most likely based on Lenox, and that an important event in the story is a sledding accident. Well, there really was an accident in Lenox only a little before she wrote that story, and Edith Wharton heard about it. On Friday, March 11th, 1904, after a day's studying in school, 5 young people, 4 girls and a boy, climbed upon a sled called a double ripper, then started their descent from Courthouse Hill. This begins at the monument in Lenox Village and heads down Old Stockbridge Road to Hawthorne Street. Back then, a long run on a fast sled for fun was called coasting, and the pastime was very popular in the depths of the Lenox winter. The people aboard were in order from front to back: Hazel Crosby, a girl with the last name Brown, Chris Henry, Kate Spencer, Mansuet Schmidt, nicknamed Mezzie, had been in the front to steer for the previous rides. But Emily Hazel Crosby asked if she could guide the sled this time. As they sped downward, she lost her grip, or perhaps was unable to see through the rushing powdery snow, and lost control. At the bottom of the hill, she was unable to avoid a cast-iron street lamp. Hazel was injured so badly that not much later she died. Some said it was amazing that she lived after the initial incident at all. She was buried at the church on the hill. It was rumored to her family's dismay that the Brown girl slid forward during the accident and worsened the Crosby girl's injuries. I haven't been able to figure out the Brown girl's first name. There were a few young ladies of about the right age living in the same town at the same time with the same last name, and I'd rather not point a finger at one only to get it wrong. Kate Spencer would wear the evidence of the accident upon her face as scars for the rest of her life, as well as damaged hearing. For a while she worked at the Lenox Library, where she befriended Edith Wharton, who was an associate manager there. It's through her that Edith would hear of the crash. Chris, or Chrissy Henry, lived with her mother, Margaret, and younger brother, Walter, on the very street where the accident happened. She was lucky and avoided anything more than bruises, but in 1920 it's shown on the census that she hasn't moved from home. Mansuet, all the way at the back, was hurt badly, and it took him a long time to recover in the home of his parents, Victor and Mary. By 1909, he was well enough to have moved to Lorain, Ohio. But by the Second World War, his draft card shows him, at the age of 55, married to another woman named Mary, and living not so far away, in Springfield, Massachusetts. My great-uncle Clement Renier, who was a kid at the time but knew those on the sled that day, everyone knew everyone back then, wrote a note about the accident. It reads, Ethan Frome, as told by Clement Renier, on January 20th, 1988. This bobsledding accident took place on Courthouse Hill, Monument, down Old Stockbridge Road, around 1909 to 1910. Crosby girl was laying flat on her tummy on the front of the bob to steer. She was killed. Brown girl was next in line. Killed the Crosby girl. Wore a lift on her leg after that. Chris Henry, girl, next in line. Knocked silly. Was never right after this. Spencer girl, okay. Mazzie Smith, boy, knocked silly. Took over a year to be right again. Lived on Cliffwood Street, across from the big white house. They were in their late teens, 18 to 20, hit the tree near Hawthorne Street. He got a few of the small details wrong. But he was 89 when he tried to recall what had happened. The fog of time had claimed some of the nuance. But back to Edith. Edith and her husband got along as friends well enough to stay married many years. At the time, people in unhappy marriages were expected to stay together a lifetime. Don't actually love each other? Should have thought of that before getting hitched. But when a man named Morton Fullerton showed up at the door, Edith fell hard. Edith knew a surplus of dashing, successful men, but Fullerton was somehow different. He liked to write, as well as many of the other things Edith took great interest in, so it seemed like she'd found a kindred spirit. He'd been traveling the world in 1906 when he ran into a good friend of Edith's. Henry told Fullerton that if he was passing through the area, he should stop and visit Edith. So he did just that. Edith had begun to find each moment spent with her husband more and more like spending it locked in a cage. It's a little like her friend Henry had sent her the key. Fullerton lingered at the Mount for a while, schmoozing with Edith and her influential friends, before continuing on his journey. She began to write him frequently. He didn't write back quite as often. It's sad that despite marrying at 23, she had to wait until she was 46 to find the sort of love that could make her heart flutter. And sadder still that it would be love for a two-timing ladies' man who she could never really have. Chances are that even if she had divorced for him, he would never have married her anyway. He used charm like a superpower, and had a gallery of rotating affairs with influential ladies. She may have loved him with her all, but she was no doubt just another notch on his belt. After the affair had ended in 1909, in fact, she requested that he destroy all the letters she had sent him. But being the untrustworthy cad he was, he couldn't be bothered. Some 70 years later, though, those letters were rediscovered and compiled into a book called The Letters of Edith Wharton. It's wonderful, really, that he was so inconsiderate. You can't blame her, really, for wanting them burned. At the time, it would have been a shocking scandal if the love letters of a married woman to her heartthrob were discovered. But now, their survival is a fascinating window into her thoughts, though it also exposes how inexperienced she is with love. Like a teen, she gushes about her feelings, begs and pleads at her lows, soars and shines at her highs, with the same sort of roller coaster ride of emotions that come from a first romance. But it couldn't last. There was simply no way. He was both engaged to his own half-cousin and living like a kept man with a wealthy French mistress, all while wooing Edith. It's not known how much all of these women knew of each other, but Edith knew enough. It was over. Not only her fling, but her marriage, too. She knew that after feeling for someone the way she had, she couldn't pretend with her husband anymore. In 1913 she divorced him after 28 years together. May have been a relief for the both of them. But her professional life seemed to suffer. Her work was suddenly judged quite harshly. She understood that it was because of her position in high society and the dishonor that came with being a divorced woman. Shortly afterward, she recorded this dream. A pale demon with dark hair came in, followed by 4 black gnome-like creatures carrying a great black trunk. They set it down and opened it, and the demon crying out, "Here's your year. Here are all the horrors that have happened to you, and still are going to happen," dragged out a succession of limp black squirming things and threw them on the floor before me. I knew what they were. The hideous, the incredible things that have happened to me in this dreadful year, or were to happen to me before its close. And I stared, horror-stricken, as the demon dragged them out, more and more, till finally, flinging down a blacker, hatefuller one, he said laughing, "There, that's the last of them." The gnomes laughed too, but I, as I stared at the great black pile and at the empty trunk, said to the demon, "Are you sure it hasn't a false bottom?" She decided the time had come to leave Lenox and the Mount. It broke her heart, but her joy had faded from the place. It was a jail to her by then. Her marriage had played out on that stage, and it was the place where her heart had been broken by her only true love. She left for France. It sold shortly after. She loved France, and the French. She felt at home there, and had made the Mount as much like her beloved Europe as she could. It only made sense to go where she was certain to find comfort and happiness. She was still in Paris when World War I began, but Edith wouldn't run. She visited the front lines, as well as the trenches a number of times, and wrote of what she experienced there. She supported the war effort with her all, helping to house refugees and pay women to work at sewing for the cause. She also began the Children of Flanders Rescue Committee. The President of France awarded her with the title Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, the first level of the French 5-level award that is the country's greatest honor, on April 18th, 1916. In stark contrast to her book about tastefully decorating an upper-class home, it was then that she wrote The Book of the Homeless, which includes work from a stunning number of famous people, including Teddy Roosevelt. Then the war ended, and Edith could finally breathe. In 1923, she left France one more time to get an honorary doctorate from Yale University, but she needed quiet. Just north of Paris, she moved into a home where she'd stay for the rest of her life. Her days of whisking around the world like the moon overhead were done. It's said that she crossed the Atlantic Ocean some 60 times, but Edith was fine in France. She had a beautiful home, friends, money, and with the silent film era roaring forward with no sign of slowing, she was even able to increase her wealth by selling the film rights to many of her short stories and novels. It was on the first day of June, 1937, that Edith suffered a heart attack. 2 months and 11 days later, she died of a stroke at her home. She was 75. The street where she died has been renamed in her honor. She was laid to rest in her adopted country with all the honors of a war hero, and was buried at the Protestant cemetery at Versailles. Where do you go if you want to see a bit of what Edith saw? You could travel to Europe, or take a drive around Lenox and admire the scenery, one of her favorite pastimes on a hot summer day. Or, even better, you could visit her home. The Mount is still there, at 2 Plunkett Street in Lenox, and is open daily. You can stroll the beautiful gardens that she worked so hard on, visit the graves of her beloved dogs with their little headstones. The Mount is preserved with painstaking love and care, just the way she liked it. There are scheduled events, tours, lectures, displays. There are even ghost hunting tours, if you dare. Please visit the Mount's website for more information. And if you like this show, you can find more episodes by looking for The Berkshires Gone By on YouTube, as well as episodes and additional information such as pictures related to our topics on our Facebook page. This has been The Berkshires Gone By, created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Renier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening.